Welcome to Oxford Really. Real students, real tutors, and real conversations about life at Wadham College in Oxford. In this first episode, we are exploring a part of the University of Oxford's famous admissions process, the Oxford interview. Keep listening to find out more about what you could expect at an Oxford interview and some tips on how best to prepare. To get an honest picture of these interviews, I talked to 5 of Wadham's current undergraduates about their own interview experiences.
My name's Mia. I'm a second year at Wadham and I study history.
I'm Ahmet. I am a first year that's studying engineering.
I'm Poppy. I'm a third year studying experimental psychology.
My name's Steph. I'm also a second year who also studies history.
And hello, my name is Will. I am a fourth year, unfortunately, studying German.
Interviews are just one piece of information that Oxford uses to make their decisions. This interactive part of the admissions process allows tutors to see how you think, to find out more about your interest in the subject or subjects you're applying for, and allows you to see whether the style of learning at Oxford is a good fit for you. This interactive discussion style of learning is an important feature of learning at Oxford, and mimics the weekly tutorials students often have. At the start of the interview, interviewers will often ease into a discussion or activity, and may use something you have submitted in your application to get started.
For my first interview, it was based around my personal statement. So my tutor picked out parts of my personal statement that kind of accorded to his field of research, and we talked about those. One of the tutors kind of asked some icebreaker questions, what have you been reading, general stuff, and then the other one kind of launched into the actual interview stuff.
When they asked you about your personal statement, I was kind of a bit more comfortable talking about it. And then it was kind of easier to get started on the questions. I was a bit less stressed during the interview. The tutors were really nice. And one thing I would just recommend, I suppose, is don't be afraid to ask questions to the tutors, because they are there to kind of help you through the problem. You're not expected to just straight up be able to answer those questions.
We just sat across from a desk, and there were 2 interviewers, and they were both really relaxed. They didn't seem, I was sort of expecting to turn up and then be dressed in suits or something, which I know sounds stupid, but they were just there in jumpers. And
we only had a few opener questions about my personal statement, and then they asked me some physics questions that kind of relate to what you study in A-level, and they tried to kind of go a bit above and beyond that to see how well you understand it or how well you can work through a problem. So they kind of expect you to ask questions to them on how to be able to solve, usually just quite a tough question. And they kind of check, it's basically like a tutorial.
They just seem very human, and I think that was one of the nicest parts of it, that all of the tutors just wanted you to feel comfortable, but they wanted to also just seem normal. They can seem like these intimidating, sort of incredible figures, but in reality they're just lovely people, and they were just so nice to chat to.
For some subjects, your task will be given during the interview, but you may be given something to read or look at slightly ahead of the interview itself.
My interview was about half an hour long, and we had to arrive half an hour before that, and we got given a paper, so we had half an hour reading time for this paper. I think mine was developmental psychology, so it was about babies. And when we got into the interview, they asked us about the paper, summarize it. What did you take from this? Have you got any critiques?
I applied for and was offered a place for history and English. So I also did an English interview at Wadham as well. And that involved we had about 15 minutes where we were given an unseen poem, and we had to sit outside the room first and basically just had our own time to process the poem.
The tutors will ask you about things you do not know about. This is because they want to hear how you think and want to see you tackling a problem and not merely recalling information.
They started light and asked sort of GCSE words that you would know, and then they're kind of seeing how far you can actually go and sort of whittling down the list of their vocab. And then we analysed the poem that I had looked at in the first 20 minutes before my interview. And then there was kind of to keep you on your feet, there was a poster sitting in my tutor's room in the corner that I had paid no attention to, whatever. So I was sitting in the chair there, wondered what was going to happen next. And then she turned around and asked me what I thought of the poster on the wall and whether I could analyse it in German. Bearing in mind this had all been in English so far. And that was the first curveball where I was like, okay.
They gave me a photo and I got no context or anything, and I had to look at this photo, kind of explain my thought process as what I thought it was and what it might be. And being given something that you haven't seen before I think is really, it can be, I can understand how that's very daunting about the Oxford interview, is that in a lot of ways, that's an element that you can't prepare for. But that is, daunting, but it is also quite good as a level playing field. Because it's basically just your tutors seeing how your brain works without preparation.
After having had their own interviews and then starting their degrees at Oxford, I asked our students, do interviews really mimic the tutorials you have as a student?
I think I'd agree that like interviews do mimic tutorials. Apart from my interview was obviously much more centered around like me and why I wanted to do the subject rather than like the actual topics within the subject.
I say it's similar in a way that it follows the same procedure. You go through a problem and tutors will try and nudge you in the right direction instead of just giving the answer to you. The big difference is in a tutorial you have a week to prepare for the questions and you get the questions beforehand. In an interview, you're going in blind, which is much more difficult, I'd say. But apart from that, it is basically like a tutorial.
But yeah, it's kind of the same general vibe. Like the tutors are trying to figure out how you think, and it's this idea of like taking a problem that we don't know much about, or that we are trying to learn about, and you're trying to get information about it essentially, and it's all about like your approach and how you can work through the problems. But I think the interview is a nice indicator of whether you would enjoy like the tutorial system as well.
They are designed to like demonstrate how the tutorial system will benefit you, because that's what they're really looking for, is that you can learn in this environment, and this is a format of learning that will produce the best results from you. So yeah, just the idea of it is a conversation between you and your tutor. It's not, a lot of teaching that you're used to at A-level is just the teacher talking at you, and there's very little chance to respond and kind of bounce ideas off that person as well. But the tutorial, and this is seen in the interview, is it's a very like a two-way process. And the interview as well should be kind of a learning experience. So they don't expect you to go into it knowing everything about your subject. Otherwise, there's no point you being at uni.
I think that the idea of getting things wrong in an interview does kind of relate quite well to whether an interview can mimic Oxford teaching and mimic a tutorial, because it's the same idea that you are not expected to arrive at a tutorial with an answer or with a correct answer in any subject. It is the point of the tutorial and the kind of discussion that you have is going through those processes that they're looking for in an interview as well. It's very much that you will go and you will have done things wrong, and you might change your mind about things while you're actually in that tutorial, and you might come out of it afterwards and think like, actually, maybe I would have done that differently, or like I don't necessarily think that anymore. And that's kind of the point of having that discussion with other people, getting other perspectives, and actually having a conversation with your tutor, who obviously is an expert in this.
During an interview, you can expect to explore a problem in depth, and you will need to communicate your thought process so that the tutors can support you. Tutors
know that you're nervous, and they are very aware that this is a very challenging experience for you. So, that there is a degree of acceptance if you fumble or if your mind just goes blank. That's very normal. That happened to me. And especially at Wadham, like, the tutors are so lovely. They can seem very intimidating, but they are lovely, and like they don't want to see you suffer, and they understand that this is a difficult and like scary thing to do. So like, don't panic if that happens, if you fumble, like if you mess up, just like take a minute to breathe, literally just pause, reset your thinking, breathe, and that's okay. And you're not going to like lose marks for doing that. And it's very normal for that kind of thing to happen, and shouldn't, try not to let it throw you off.
They want to see how you approach some problem that you're not really familiar with. And like, I guess if you got really frustrated and you looked like really like you weren't willing to try and think and be a bit creative, then they might be, like, they're less interested than if you sit there and you're willing to like work at something, take advice, and like sort of collaborate until you reach an answer, because that's more how the tutorials are like structured.
In my case, I was given a circuit, and I was kind of just told to describe it and like the components and stuff. And in the end, they had to like kind of help me quite a lot with what they were trying to get me to do, which was to derive a formula that you had learned in A level. And at the end of it, I was also really proud that I was able to do it just from like a circuit diagram. Although like on my own, I wouldn't have gotten it right. I had to ask the tutors specific questions on what to do. So again, the odds are you will get stuck on your interview questions, and the best thing to do is just accept that and ask your tutors questions, because essentially when you get into Oxford, you are supposed to ask them questions a lot.
I don't even think a lot of the time they're particularly looking for you to get to the right answer. It's just how you're going to work through it. So like, I know in my example, like with languages, it's difficult because with a language, you either get something right or wrong. It's more objective. Whereas with literature, there's so many different interpretations. So I kind of found that when I was talking about literature and talking about my interpretations, for example, of the poem or of a piece that they gave me, they were kind of taking my answers, and sometimes they go, okay, that's an interesting idea, which sometimes okay, they don't agree, or they try and push you in another direction. So they're constantly kind of tailoring your answer for you and pushing you in the right direction. Whereas there was in one of my interviews, I was handed a piece of German, a passage from a German novel, and I basically had to translate it on the spot orally. And I got to this one word, and and he was like, "What does this mean?" And I was like, "I have no idea. I've never seen this word ever before." And he was like, kind of, "Okay, we'll work towards it. What do you think it could be?" And so I kind of broke it down in German. There's kind of like two nouns put together, and I was like, well, I think I know that noun, or it sounds at least kind of like that. So potentially it could be something to do with this, and I know that word on its own means this, so put together maybe something like that. And he told me straight out, he was like, nope, you're wrong. But he was kind of more interested in the way I went about it. He liked that I broke down the two words and worked them out separately, and then what it could be together.
I was a lot more confident in my second interview, but in my first interview, I was very nervous. And, a lot of it's not necessarily that I got something wrong. And there isn't, especially in history and humanities, it's not necessarily that you'll get it wrong as such. But I did need quite a bit of prompting on some of the things. So I think, like my tutor asked me, I think, why do you think Machiavelli's ideas were so controversial at in his time, and his ideas of virtue and things like that. And it took, it's quite a few, at least 3 prompts from my tutor for me to kind of get to the answer that it was about, Christian values in society and how that was so embedded in the culture and things like that. And, that was, I definitely needed the prompting, but that's okay. And I think the fact that, it did take me a while to get to the answer, but when I got to the answer, I was so like visibly, happy and enthusiastic that I got there. I think that played a part into, that in itself, that process. It's a two-way process there. And that's not something to be afraid of. And it's not something that you should come out of the interview and be like, oh, I got it wrong, I'm not going to get in. If anything, it's a demonstration of how that system is going to be good for you to learn. So yeah, not getting things wrong isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it's good to ask for help and have that conversation with the tutor.
It's always about your ability to like break things down, work through something difficult, and not to panic, but to think calmly about things.
And finally, I was interested to find out how our students reflected on their own interviews and what advice they have for anyone approaching their own Oxford interview.
I was really not sure about whether I wanted to come to Oxford. I was really doubting applying. So I get it, but I think definitely just go for it. If you just apply and if you go for interview, a lot of the time that will kind of put some of those fears at rest, especially when you meet people who are applying and you realise that actually a lot of these people are normal, just like, you know, I'm normal, and that's okay.
If you're thinking about applying, I'd say definitely go for it. It's a really rigorous process, and they'll make sure that everyone's on a level playing field. You get contextualized GCSE scores, you'll sit entrance exams, so having a bad interview is not end of all. So, and if you're waiting on interviews, I'd say for sciences, you can't really prepare much apart from maybe just going over your topics. If you're able to have a mock interview or talk to your friends, definitely go for it. Talk about your subject more. I definitely agree with that. But yeah, it is a really rigorous process. It is difficult. But just because you think you're at a disadvantage, or you may as well be at a disadvantage, Oxford does make sure that you get a level playing field. For example, in engineering interviews, you get 2 of them at different colleges, and tutors will swap notes. You may do good in one of them, you may do bad in one of them. So they kind of try and make sure cancel out all those variables. So I definitely try not to be afraid going into the process.
Go over your personal statement, go over your written coursework or whatever else you submitted for your particular subject. Just be on it.
Be comfortable just talking about your subject. And you might not be in a position to have a mock interview. The librarian in my school, I asked her and she just kind of made something quite informal, and it was quite terrifying actually. But I think trying to even just talk to friends, to family, to teachers, to anyone just about your subject a bit more, because you might actually find that it's just not something you're as used to doing because you don't really have to do it at school.
I think it's natural to be nervous and to worry about it. Like interviews for anything can be stressful, but kind of use that to your advantage and worry about the things that you are in control of. So rather than thinking and worrying about what questions they might ask you and worrying about all of these myths that you hear about Oxford interviews and how awful it's going to be, don't worry about that. Just worry about what you are in control of, which is, why do you like the subject? What topics really interest you? If you've got a topic that you're going to want to talk about, maybe do a bit more research on that, like write some notes on it, have some thoughts about it that you're ready to present them. Like, really take control of your interview and take control of how it's going to go. And you're clearly in a great position in that subject already, because you're even in the position of applying or waiting to go to interview. So you're a very capable person to be able to turn up to this interview as anyone else would and answer whatever they throw at you.
Like, the interviews aren't the be all and end all. Like, I didn't have an amazing interview. I know so many people who thought their interviews went terribly. But I also know like a similar number of people who went, oh no, my interviews went really well. And they got in as well. So it's like, it really doesn't matter how you think it went. So you just don't need to stress too much.
That obviously, yes, you're going there as part of a selection process and you're part, they're going to decide whether they want to have you. But you also have other great options. So it's not entirely about sort of you walking in and being like really terrified and it's the be all and end all, because it's not. The interviews are part of a bigger picture as part of the application process. That is important to note. But also, like, think of it as like, this is, you get to walk in and try to be confident in the fact that you've made it to this point. And that's a massive achievement in itself to have made it through this entire process and made it to the interviews.
I hope this episode has given a new insight into the interview process at Oxford and what the tutors are really looking for. If you'd like more information on interviews, head to ox.ac.uk/interviews. And if you are preparing for an interview and have any questions, do get in touch with the admissions team at the college you've applied to or have been allocated. All the best from Wadham College.